Hi everyone, and welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to be talking about how we can go about testing components, and the realization that not everything needs to be an end-to-end test. So a little bit about me. My name's David. I'm the head of the open source program office at BrowserStack. I chair the browser testing and tools W3C group. I'm a Selenium committer, and I work on other various open source projects that some of you do use, and some of you won't. But I generally work in the open source space constantly. And so today, as I said earlier, we're going to talk about how to test components. So obviously we need to learn about what a component is, how do we make them, because generally the best way to understand how to test something is how to know it's made. And then how do we go about testing them? And so hopefully by the end of this you'll have a good idea about how we can create meaningful tests that can kind of last for a long time, and hopefully start getting you to think about not writing full end-to-end tests for everything, but writing smaller component tests that are going to be a lot less flaky. So first of all, what are components? Now, components are these small building blocks that allow us to kind of generate a web page. These could either be components within a front-end framework like Vue, React, Ember, and Svelte, and many others. Or this could be a web component. Now, a lot of these things have been created, these front-end frameworks or even web components, because when kind of the whole concept of HTML and the web and things like that were being created, not a lot of thought was put into how we can create reusability, modularity, and all these like general things that we have to do whenever we create other bits of software. The main reason is that the web was designed primarily for sharing information, large bodies of texts, things like that. Fortunately, the web has moved on greatly, and we're now at a stage where we have rich applications that we can kind of do photo editing on, that we can kind of view the world, interact with different things, play games with everyone. And a lot of this has come through innovations that have come through from different companies, because they wanted to like build these simple things, plug every little box together. If you look at the bottom of that screen, like you see all those boxes, think of those as components, you put them all together and you have your final solution. So components are kind of driving the web to where it needs to be in the future. It's not perfect, nothing ever is, but it is hopefully moving us through into a new space. And so, as I was saying earlier about these components, a lot of them are built into frameworks nowadays. Today I'm probably going to just mostly focus on Vue and React, but like I said, there are others, Svelte, Ember, and so like the main idea with what I talk about today was hopefully just getting you to think about how we can change the way we do some of our testing in the browser in a meaningful way. So as we go into kind of understanding how everything is made, to hopefully teach us how we can go about building our tests for the future, it's like I say, it's always better to understand how everything is made. Here we have an example of a render method from React, and so whenever a render method is called, it needs to return a blob of HTML that then will be injected into the page, rendered, and people can start using it. Event listeners and all that can be built through different parts of what are called components. So this is the render part, that's the part that kind of just puts it on the page, but you can also add event listeners, so that like if there's a click on something or a change, right, So we have a on change, and there is a link to a method there. We can put values where we're sharing state between different things, and so we can build this out. The problem is that like sometimes whenever this happens, front-end frameworks take a little bit of liberty to make sure that, like, well, if you're injecting this thing onto the page, we need to make sure it's got an individual identifier so that we don't get crossed wires. Now, if you've ever done a little bit of Angular and protractor testing, you know how painful that actually is. And so kind of this is the other side of the, like, when we talk about components, like, how do we go about testing these in a meaningful way so that, like, we don't get stuck? But then there's the other side of things, right? I know, just because this is something I tend to keep an eye on, is that page size and things like that matter. So the kind of the blurry blob on the left is me. This is from GTAC, the Google Test Automation Conference, in about 2008, 2009. I can't really remember exactly. And me and my co-speaker there, David Henderson, were talking about how we could use automation to track all of the page sizes, the page weights that were coming through from the site that we were currently working on when I worked at a company called Smart Focus. And front-end frameworks generally put a lot of extra weight onto it. And so people kind of started thinking, well, there must be a much better way that we can do this. And there is. And this is an example of something. Here I've created a bit of HTML, and we have a Selenium shadow element feature tag in this HTML. Now this is an example of a web component. So earlier I showed you an example of a front-end framework, but here is a web component. Web components are built into the browser. They allow you to, like, not have to ship entire front-end frameworks whenever you make changes, but it allows you to kind of build the thing that you want. It works cross-browser. It works in Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Edge, Opera, and it's a really, really great feature that allows you to kind of do these things at a much lighter weight front-end framework, which is, I can guarantee you now, if you rely on Google searching your website, Google will give you bonus points for kind of using web components over front-end frameworks. And so in this case, this is the kind of way we do it, is that you create a bit of JavaScript that allows you to kind of create the element. You build it off a kind of primitive that is in the browser, so an HTML element or anything that you can think of, and you build it, and then you attach what's called a shadow root, and then from there's a little bit of like magic that happens in the browser, and then you have this new DOM element, but inside there you can have multiple elements, but kind of people don't generally see it unless they kind of peek into it. Again, it's going to create some interesting problems, but I'll get there in a minute. And with all these great new features, how do we test them? The reality is, kind of, people started shouting that we fixed the web. You thought about testing, right? And clearly no one thought about testing. Not even with front-end frameworks. How do you build these things? How do you kind of put them together? How do you make sure that they work cross-browser, right? There's a lot of like assumptions that people suddenly put onto frameworks that might not necessarily hold true. And so, as I say, let's be honest. Who thinks about testing? As a tester, when I was a tester, like no one ever thought about testing, and I would catch all these issues that people hadn't thought about and be like, well, I've thought about them. Clearly you should be thinking about them. And I know for everyone watching this, this will ring true. And so from the web components side, on it, Steed wrote in Jim Evans. He started talking about how we can test React components, not like anything that has to do with shadow components. And he gave us the kind of the tools that we can use in everything, and allowed us mechanisms that are now built into Selenium. He kind of wrote the spec pros, he's kind of guided the tests and everything, and so it's kind of pushed how browsers have changed the way we test Shadow DOM in a meaningful way. There are frameworks out there like Playwright and Cypress that kind of they have their own way of kind of navigating these tools, but they don't necessarily have a good developer experience. You can't take those same locators, copy them into your favorite dev tools and get working. It just doesn't work. The way Jim has designed it is that you can still do those things and move on. So it's really great. And it's allowed us to do things like this. So on the screen now we have a little bit of Nightwatch.js code, and it allows us to build these like really simple tests. What we do is just we mount the component, so a small snippet of of the page, right? And make sure that one thing is working brilliantly. And you can do this, and you can create so you might have a form, you might have different aspects of your page and little widgets all around, and suddenly you can now just test those small snippets in a meaningful way cross-browser really simply. But if you don't want to use Nightwatch.js, you can just use straight up Selenium. So in this case we've got just finding elements. So in this case you got to find your shadow element, so that's the element that we created through some JavaScript. Just dive into the shadow root. Now one of the things I didn't mention earlier is when you create these shadow roots, they can either be opened or closed. Some frameworks like Cypress and Playwright, they can only really look at open shadow roots. The solution through Selenium allows you that if someone decides to give you a closed shadow root, you can still peer in and navigate through it cleanly. Find your element, interact with it, do your assertions, whatever, but you have these all ready for you. And with that, we've come to the end. So hopefully you've learned what front-end components are and what web components are and how they're impacting the web. Do remember that some of them can add a lot of extra weight to a page, which can impact you negatively. And we learned about how we go about interacting with them. And with that, we've reached the end. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.